Hello, everybody. Welcome to Castles and Cantrips Tome of Knowledge, where we give you tomes full of knowledge right at your fingertips. We just hand them directly to you through the internet. Yeah, we just, here you
That's how
go.
you do it. Just
Have it.
open
There you
up.
go. Would you like some more knowledge today? I'm
You
here
know
with,
that
oh, go ahead.
I was saying, that GIF that's going around where the kid is scooping up the words from the book and then just like putting it into his brain like this, just like that's what we're doing here today.
I've not seen that, but I need to. But I'm here with Virtual Spectre and Moves Like Jagger from the GGN crew, and we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about metagaming specifically.
Ooh wee. Could be
Meta
spicy, could be not.
could be in between, could be lukewarm.
Yep. Depends on the group, I guess.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for watching, hanging out. If you haven't, go check out our YouTube, go subscribe, go watch some stuff. Because we are over 3,100 watch hours, and we need to get to 4,000 before YouTube will love us. And it would make my heart full of joy if YouTube would love us. So go check out our YouTube. I would appreciate it.
Do it. Yes, please. We're working hard.
We are. I mean, this has nothing to do with today, but man, I swear I ran into some issues editing on Saturday, and I was so mad because I didn't realize that the drive I do for all my editing got full. So I waited for this render to finish like 40 to 50 minutes, and then it was like, oh, it's full. Sorry. Fun times.
Yeah.
I'd do a little
Why?
hard drive audit. But anyway, good to see you, Chiba and Yap and Bun. Hello, and Zeus. Good to see y'all here in the chat hanging out with us.
Hello, everyone.
And those of you
Hello.
that are listening in the future when this comes out on our podcast. So, metagaming. What is it? Why is it?
Why is it?
Where is it?
Well, somewhat. Yeah.
Go ahead.
What's should we pull out the urban? Not the urban dictionary. Wow,
I don't know if I'd look for the Urban Dictionary for that.
And I'm done. I don't know anymore.
I have notes. I have notes. So if you want me to handle the definition stuff, I certainly
Go for it.
can. So
I'm not here. Pretend I'm not here.
Metagaming, we can never do that. Metagaming refers to using out of character knowledge or information that a player may have to influence their in-game decisions and actions. And to take this a little further, it means that they're basically making their decisions for their characters based on information that their character might not have or be aware of. And this could be in regards to like specific like events that may have occurred that they may not know about, specific information like about monsters or like published like adventures, stuff like that. Stuff like that. So that's metagaming.
Yeah. I think it's some groups do it all the time. Some groups absolutely hate it. I guess it really depends. I guess that's something we never talked about in our session 0 is metagaming. I think we've been pretty good in role playing as our characters, but I mean sometimes metagaming slips in there, but I don't think it has been a detriment to the show or anything or the campaign like that.
I think we kind of, we didn't technically talk about it in session 0, but I think when you have a session 0 and you figure out like what type of players you're playing with and what the DM wants to do, I think you can kind of get a feel for how players might play the game. And so sometimes it might not even be necessary to talk about metagaming. If everybody's like, I'm going to role play and we're all going to have fun and it's going to be a story, and you probably don't have to worry too much about somebody that's might, bring in some metagaming stuff and change the experience. But who knows? I don't know. Should we have talked about it? Is that something you should talk about at a session 0?
I think so, but I also have specific things in our session 0. While we didn't explicitly say metagaming, it's designed to sort of control aspects of metagaming too. Big brain moves from
You heard it
from
here.
your DM.
Max just wants to control all of us.
We did talk about it.
It might be in there. Let me hold on. Let me pull up our session 0, and if there's a section called metagaming,
I
and
don't
if there is a
remember.
section called metagaming, then y'all owe me something. I don't know what it is. Let me see.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Zeus brings up a good. That's the one thing I was just about to bring up. What Zeus mentioned is like, veteran players will spoil monster abilities for new players. Like, oh, make sure
Yeah.
you use fire acid. But it's like, is that just common knowledge for generaling adventurings? Right? Are there's like certain knowledges and skills that adventurers would just know, just being because they're adventurers and going out? Is there like an adventuring 101 school and like these are trolls and trolls regenerate a lot unless you use,
Maybe, but
you know?
there's also like systems in the game for players who like want to try and sort of divine that information, right? You have like nature checks and
Yeah.
if you encounter a monster, like if there's a player that's knowledgeable or their character's knowledgeable on the, I mean, there's stuff in game for that. So yeah,
So
I don't know if that's meta or
I think that in this regards, like, so here's some examples. If you don't know what we're talking about, here's some specific examples to jump into first. Like what you said with like trolls who are weak against, fire and acid that keeps them from regenerating. Or like werewolves, you have to use like magic or silver weapons. Some other ones are one thing that, since we do our death saves in secret, but let's say you're a party of adventurers and one of your characters goes down, and you know that they've made 2 successful death saving throws, they're probably not going to die soon. So you could just take care of that later, kind of thing. So we made that rule for us where it's secret to add that urgency of someone being down. But yeah, that's using meta knowledge or metagaming of just like, oh, they're not close to death because they've been making their death saves, so I've got time, kind of thing. Another thing too are like puzzles as well. I'm on the fence about puzzles though. I think metagaming in puzzles is okay because it's very hard to solve a puzzle as your character based on what they would know. And most of the time, I feel like if it's like a logic puzzle or something like that, I feel like the DM is making the puzzle for the characters or for the players and not necessarily their characters, unless it involves like role play or like in-game knowledge or something like that. But that's where I'm on the fence about puzzles. I also don't like puzzles, so adding an extra layer of abstraction to me isn't fun. But I'll say that like metagaming, it's not always intentional either. It's not always like malicious or intentional, because there's some stuff that, like, especially with like veteran players, it's hard to just like not know things that you just know after you've been playing for a while. So I wouldn't say it's always malicious, but something you have to kind of be on the lookout for sure.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to separate yourself from your character too, as well. So a lot of time people are playing themselves for the most part. So they're like, well, I'm playing myself, so I have this knowledge, and my character has this knowledge. But that's not always the case. But it does happen. It just you really kind of have to like wait and pause and say, well, does my character really know this? And then that's when, yeah, knowledge checks come into play.
to Zeus's earlier point about like potentially like a veteran player spoiling a new player on like a monster ability or something. I think like from having watched D&D, I'm familiar with some encounters, and like if we in our game come up with something that I'm familiar with, and maybe other people in our party aren't, I don't, as a player, I want to like try and respect my fellow players, so I won't like say, oh, watch out, this monster does this. But in order to like, impress like upon them, like this could be a rough encounter, I might say something like, oh man, like I feel like these guys are pretty tough, so everybody be careful or be on your best, be on point with this or something, where you're not exactly spoiling anything, but it's, if you, I think it's, there's levels to it where you can kind of bring a little bit of meta in order to like make sure everybody's like prepared for this fight because it might be more serious than they may think. But you're not actually like spoiling much for them, if anything at all.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know. What do
that
you guys
goes
think
into
about that?
intention too. And you're also a good and thoughtful player as well, who's not trying to beat D&D.
Yeah.
So let's take
I
that with
I
a grain of salt.
I I think this is the first group I've played in that where no one's a min-maxer. I think a lot of min-maxers metagame quite a bit, because they want to be the best and they want to win all the time. So I think because none of us are min-maxers, we're just all having a great time.
Mhm.
So that's a first for me. I've
Yay.
played in a handful of groups.
It's hard to. I've seen sessions with players that really like to min max, and sometimes it's hard to watch if that's. It can be like a. Sometimes it's just not fun, you
Mhm.
know, to watch them like really try and crunch the numbers or fight the DM on every little thing. You know,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Couple good things in chat. Zeus, you're talking about in fourth edition. Yet another good thing that fourth edition had, even though people happen to hate it, is that monsters had like specific knowledge rolls built in of what you could know about the monster based on what knowledge roll that you did. And
Yep.
I think that me as a DM, I should be more explicit about that. Of hey, you want to learn stuff about what's going on, you can do these knowledge rolls. And then what Bun is saying is that intention is always a good way to approach it, which is one of my notes. So player intention is important. So are they metagaming to like gain an advantage to solve a puzzle faster, or are they just so excited that they want to do cool stuff in the game that they really kind of take it a little too far? You have to take that into account. I think someone using metagaming to try and just to cheat versus
Yeah.
versus like just excited that they know something is different. Like, I would say an egregious use of metagaming is if, I introduced a monster and a player just looked it up in the monster manual.
Yeah.
Like that would be a
Oh yeah.
very egregious use of metagaming. Don't do that. But a little later I have some notes on how to like mitigate some of this stuff. We can talk about that a little later as well.
Yeah, I think it's metagaming is very different when it comes to players and DMs. So most players aren't DMs. And then most of the time some DMs are forever DMs, but then there's rare occurrences where DMs get to finally be the player. So they have a plethora, full ton of knowledge about monsters at D&D. So I think there's a hard balance there of turning off their DM mind and being a player, but just like having that reservoir of all the monsters that they've been using. It's just
Mhm.
must be, I don't know, Max, but have you struggled with that?
Um, not, no, not really. I think for me, it is hard to separate what I know as a person versus my character. But I think it's safe to say of, if I know something specifically, instead of just doing it, I think it's fair play to be like, oh, this monster's weird. I've never seen it. Can I make some kind of roll to see, what I might know about it? And I think that's totally fair play because you're not giving anything away. You're using in-game mechanics to try and understand something. If you don't use the roll, if you don't get the roll, you don't get the roll. And you just kind of go on until you kind of brute force figure it out with the rest of the party.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier. The game provides some things for those players who do want to provide information to their party. They can make those rolls and then educate about certain things depending on what they roll. So yeah, it's I will say that it's nice to have the game that provides that option for you, but kind of just bringing that out of nowhere is you bring information that you did not acquire in game. Sometimes it's like it can be bad, but I guess it just depends on what their intention with that is. Like you were saying, intention matters a whole lot.
Yeah, and going back to the troll example, another aspect of this is like encounter and like game balance, right? If you're trying to make a balanced encounter for your party, if someone comes in immediately and be like, "Oh, got to use fire and acid," and so they won't regenerate, so we can take them down. That really knocks down the difficulty of a troll at least a relatively significant amount. I mean, there's still a pain in the ass to fight, but once you come armed with that knowledge from outside the game, you really kind of take away one of the like defining features of that monster.
Yeah, another good example could be those in our last session, those big sea snakes.
Mm-hmm.
If one of
Man.
us had knowledge about their effect, their what was it, madness that came with their venom, and told
Yeah.
everybody like, "Hey,
Goddamn.
if you get bit, you're gonna have this effect on you," and it's like, then that kind of like the
Yeah.
surprise of that role happening and learning what that was in game just immediately made the encounter that much more serious, and it brings a whole other level of engagement to it for not only the players but for like the people watching if they're not aware either. So if somebody
Mhm.
immediately comes out and be like, "Hey, these guys are gonna bite you and it's gonna do this to you," that would kind of suck.
Yeah, especially as a new player coming in and be like, "Oh, well, I didn't know that. Okay, I guess I won't." I totally agree
Yeah.
there.
I kind of want to commend our chat as well, because chat doesn't really meta at all, really, when we're live streaming.
Yeah.
Because we are reading chat, except for Max, for the most part. So we're seeing what chat's saying while we're streaming. Yeah, chat does a great job not spoiling anything, because I think those serpents were a surprise to all of us. I was like, oh, it's just poison, whatever. But yeah, that was man, that was intense.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with Zeus is that this is why using an action to do that knowledge roll is where it becomes worth it. So you're giving up your entire action to figure like a major thing about the monster. Yeah, I agree there. That's where the action economy kind of makes sense, but just coming in and knowing it doesn't.
Reminds
Yes.
me of Final Fantasy games where you using a instead of using a spell or anything, you would just use like status or whatever, and you would just learn all
Yeah.
the stats and weakness of the creature that you're fighting.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. 100%. It also comes into a weird sort of I don't know if it's I guess it'd be a dichotomy of like the characters agency versus like players agency too, right? Where the player making decisions for their character that their character has like no idea about. I think it kind of lessens some of like the role play aspects and other stuff too as well.
Guess we could talk about party planning. I know we have our own party Discord for just the party that Max can't see, where we discuss certain aspects of the game. However, we don't like. I don't think there's any real metagaming that happens. It's just more sort of a room to explore stuff based on knowledge we already have. Like if we end a session and we're in a situation and that we know we're gonna have to pick up the next week, we'll be like, "Hey, do we have any ideas about this?" And it's mostly like, you know, battle strategy for a battle we haven't seen yet for the most part. And so we're just kind of spitballing like ideas. What's the thoughts on that sort of thing? Does that fall under metagaming, or is a certain aspect of planning outside the game acceptable?
So we're in a unique position because we're streaming the game live, right? And we have like 3 to 4 hours to do the stuff. And we try to limit the amount of like out of character like talk and like discussions and stuff like that because there's a specific rule or not a rule but a conversation in our session 0 that anything you say we're taking it as your character saying it to avoid those kind of what do we do, I don't know, what should we do, let's try this kind of conversations that can quickly turn into like a spiral. But I think that in a normal D&D game, I think it's okay to an extent of having some like strategic planning, because you want the game to go forward, right? Some people like to plan, they want it to go forward, and that's kind of what y'all use for that chat specifically, is like I have to
where
know
do
what
we
y'all are
go?
gonna do.
Who are we talking to?
Right. I have to
Like,
know like what you plan on doing, or like any indication of like what's your next move, that kind of stuff, or what are you
Yeah.
thinking? Like, what do you want to see? Like that kind of stuff, just so I get information about what's going on. And I think that you all need that, especially for some of like the like some of the party like admin type stuff of like items or like gold splitting up, all that stuff. Like there has to be a place for that. And for us specifically, we don't have a place during the stream for
Yeah.
that.
We try to keep that off stream because it could just literally take the whole episode of us micromanaging items, equipment, gear, shopping, all that stuff. So I don't to us we don't think that is entertaining to watch. You know, it's just kind of like mundane D&D stuff
Finance and accounting.
that's just easier resolved when we do it offline or in our chat. That way we can keep the show running.
Yeah, that's just kind of a unique problem with live streaming the game. Yeah, definitely with Zeus is that 100% had sessions where it's just discussing options and then never resolving. Like I've been in games where it's like 2 hours trying to make a decision on whether someone should open the door or not, or if they should check it for traps. Like nobody wants to play that. Nobody wants to watch that. Like, I mean, and then someone gets to be the asshole who just opens it, and tries to move things on. And everyone's mad at him. Like,
oh, fuck this! Barbarian just opens it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
There's yeah, those situations can be a little tiresome, especially if you're watching. And I think sometimes watching a party like overthink things and then come up on the encounter and have it be like the dumbest thing, like the dumbest solution that nobody thought of, can provide some like a little bit of entertainment, but you don't want an entire 4 hours of like a planning session.
Which is why I steer y'all to make plans in character, because usually the conversations don't last anywhere near as long if you're in character making a plan.
So Past Amoeba asks, when did you all become good enough players to not do that? I think it's hard. Doesn't matter how long you've been playing, right? And I think it's really up to the DM to reel the players in if they are going into a chaos brainstorming thing where they're trying to figure out what to do next. I think it's up to the DM to either like, all right, you're taking too long, something's happening, or just start rolling dice.
Make a perception check.
Yeah, exactly.
I like to call it a conversational cul-de-sac. Just kind of go around and around and around. But you've got to set expectations as the DM, and you have to discuss together as a group, because people, they really forget that the game it's a team effort, right? It's not players versus DM. It's everyone has to kind of work together to have a good experience. So you have to talk to your players. If you're a DM, you can't get around it. You got to talk to them. You got to let them know what kind of game you're running, what kind of game they want to play, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's just because, one, most of us have already played an entire campaign 1, so we kind of knew expectations going in for most of us. And then the reason I say that is because this is Nina's first campaign with us. And then 2, using that session 0 to be like, hey, here's kind of what I expect for like, gameplay. Here's what, you should do if this stuff happens. It's all part of the conversation. I don't think it's necessarily a good enough versus not good enough. It's just more like party, like norms, like group norms of how things have to be handled and how everyone agrees that things need to be handled. And there's been very few times, I think, in the campaigns where I've been like, hey, you're talking out of character, keep it in character kind of thing. But, if it comes up, you can just kind of, anybody at the table can bring that up and then just kind of get steered back onto the path.
Yeah.
I think 2 episodes ago on the live stream for the show campaign 2, we kinda did the planning thing live. We didn't really discuss what was gonna happen, and, we did it all in character, so it didn't seem like it would take too long. It was just like, what would my character do in this situation as the captain? And, and then there was like a maybe 1 or 2 times where I was like, "Well, hold on, let's change the plan." And
Yeah.
like improving the like because Taj was supposed to be the captain, Alara, and then I was like, no, Captain Alara actually needs to see this, so it wouldn't make sense. So like we changed the plan. So I think we did a pretty good job of coming up with a plan as our characters rather than like as players.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, like I remember my feeling of kind of sitting back and letting y'all do it is I got like the first little hint of maybe I should rein him in, and then y'all were done as soon as I got that little kind of DM sense tingle, and then y'all had finished up by then. So,
Yeah.
but
Yes, chat was going off like this plan is not gonna work. All the chat was like, "There's
it
no way this is gonna work."
it was actually a good plan. I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but it was a good plan and it worked. Um,
Gosh.
I think there are some cases though with because most of the time metagaming has a sort of bad connotation to it. Um, I think that there can be some positives about metagaming as well, like sharing knowledge and kind of mentoring newer players, or especially like the type of game that you're playing. Where ours is sort of a narrative driven, like same 5 players story campaign. There's plenty of other campaigns that are like West Marches style, sandbox, pick up and go. Um, and there's some cases where like you just have to share knowledge to understand like what the hell's going on with all the rest of the groups. Now, some stuff can be like kept from them by design, but there has to be like a mechanism for everyone to like share knowledge, whether it's like in a Discord, or people can kind of like just chat in the Discord about things that happen to spread the knowledge. But there's certainly times where it can be a good thing to help the game.
Mhm.
Zeus had a question. When talking about min-maxing, which is generally lumped into the negative column for metagaming, does the making oddball character builds have a negative effect on the rest of the party by artificially penalizing the rest of the party? Is it equivalent or different? So you're saying like using the same kind of knowledge you would to min-max and then making a purposefully weird playing
Yes,
character?
Zeus
Struck
makes min
party.
characters.
I don't
Just
I
kidding.
don't know.
Mid.
Just kidding,
I
Zeus.
don't know.
Uh, so I think from knowing you probably the best out of anybody here, I don't think it's a problem specifically for you just because of how much fucking D&D knowledge that you have. And you are like, if anyone could pull that off, you are, because you understand the game well enough that if your random rolled characters give you lemons, you usually make lemonade out of it, and it makes it more interesting anyway. But I also think that as long as your party's okay with it, like if we were playing a game and I was like, hey, I want to randomly roll my character, it could be spectacular or it could be spectacularly awful. Like, are you all cool with it? And I think that
Yeah.
as long as everybody else is cool with it, and that's fine.
Seems like a
Um,
session 0 thing to bring up.
yeah,
Like
Yeah, because you
some
could
parties,
easily. Go ahead.
I was gonna say some parties, like Max was saying, might be totally fine. But if there's like a specific thing a party wants to accomplish in a game, and your character could potentially get in the way of that more often than not, then they might have a problem with it. Yeah, just discuss it with your DM and everybody else.
hmm and I think like what you're saying, Chiba, too, is you've made like non-combat characters. Like I think that's awesome. Just talk to your group about it. Be like, hey, my character might not be super useful in combat because I'm not building them that way, but they're really fucking useful everywhere else, which would normally be the case there. So it's almost like you just you have to talk to people. Just talk to people, even though it's horrible. I know.
Yeah. Me and my other friends, we played in a campaign where they made vow poverty and nonviolence monk, and it was really difficult for him to play with us because we're a combat heavy group. So they ended up like, sorry, this character's not working for this group. So they decided to re-roll, you know. So those situations may come up as well where you come up, you have this idea, everyone's like, cool, and then in actual gameplay, you kind of realize like, oh yeah, this character doesn't work for this specific campaign. So doesn't mean you can bring that character back at a different campaign that's like right for the setting or wherever that character's going to be in. But yeah, it
Yeah.
happened.
Mhm. It's almost like most of D&D's problems are solved by communication. I think too, it also heavily depends on what kind of game you're playing. If you're playing a game that's like heavy like political intrigue, like your non-combat character might be the most useful out of the bunch, right? Or if you're playing a sort of game that's heavy on like social encounters, that's a different kind of situation than like what you're mentioning, like a combat heavy type group. So that's something that you should take into consideration too.
Yep. Um,
Making chaotic decisions to seem wild and mysterious.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you said you had some notes how to circumvent or manage metagaming, Max.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of this does fall on the DM to sort of set up expectations. But I think that once the expectations are set, anyone in the group can sort of point things out. It doesn't always have to be the DM. So like first off, setting your expectations, use that session 0, talk about the game, talk about the kind of game you want to play. Like, you know, for us, the couple examples we gave for session 0 is like, hey, death saves are made in secret, so nobody knows how dead someone is or is not at the time. Or, you know, for us, we have like, you know, keep, you know, out of character conversations to a minimum, especially in combat kind of thing. If you're talking in character. That kind of curtails some of the metagaming type stuff. Look at our session 0 doc to see what other gems that are in there that I can think of specifically about metagaming. Nothing that I can see off the top of my head anyway.
Well, I think you do a fun thing in our campaigns that kind of, in a way, it limits the amount of metagaming that can happen. Is varying the sorts of encounters the party has. So instead of just like all of our encounters being combat all the time, where we're just running into enemies, you do things like skill challenges,
Mm-hmm.
or like you said before, puzzles. Those things where players don't really like the skill challenges. Depending on what the challenge is, the only thing the player can really work from is their stat sheet.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be hard pressed to have any sort of ability for metagaming in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
I think some other things I have in notes are like being careful how you specifically describe like things like monsters or like NPCs, or you know, instead of saying that um you know your party is going up against a werewolf, maybe you say that it's some sort of wolf-like creature standing on two legs with sharp teeth and like an elongated snout. Or instead of saying like they see a troll, you see a large creature with long kind of spindly fingernails and long matted hair. You know, describe what they're seeing and maybe not just say like it's a troll. That can kind of help some of this stuff too. So that doesn't immediately trigger in their minds like, oh, troll, what do trolls do? Okay. So be more descriptive as opposed to just naming off what they're fighting. And on that point too, when it comes to like monsters and stuff like that, customize them, modify your monsters, which is a really great DM thing to do in the first place. It keeps things spiced up for your D&D, but it also kind of throws metagaming out the window. Maybe in your world, trolls don't like ice and radiant instead of fire and acid. It's your world. You can do whatever you want. Just because a player read the monster manual doesn't mean they're right. Doesn't mean it's going to help them.
Yeah.
Like there's plenty of opportunities to do that, and it's okay. I mean, I would encourage it for sure.
You got different species of monster in different locations, like where a troll might be typically in snow regions or something. The players could be exploring a desert area, and there could be a desert variant of trolls that have completely different attacks or resistances, and
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
EVify all your monsters. EV has like 20,000 evolutions.
true.
One thing that I'll do too is going a step further from like modifying monsters specifically is I'll take a stat block for a certain kind of monster and use it for something else completely different. Like not like a different troll. It's like a wholly different thing in entirety. I'll just use a stat block as a starting point and just completely reskin it, which makes it even more difficult if you have issues with players that are metagaming to kind of get a leg up on you. So that's another great way to do that, is just changing up your monsters and your enemies and stuff like that.
I know you're gonna have so many. Actually, this monster does this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's like, well, actually, it's not. This is not that world. It's my world.
Right, and then another thing on top of that too is, and you've talked about it before. I think when we had our discussion about designing encounters and whatnot, where a player comes up against the players are exploring a cavern and they're up against 3 trolls, where players could have some knowledge on how to take down a troll, but if they play smart and they're paying attention to their surroundings, there could be a way to avoid the fight altogether, which
Mhm.
makes their metagaming knowledge like not matter. There
Yeah.
could be any number of ways you could maybe these trolls can communicate. Maybe they have higher intelligence, and you could form a bond with them instead of fighting them. So there's all kinds of various ways I could see, like a DM ways to just kind of subvert what a player might expect to do in a situation. So
Yeah. And I feel like I'd like to think that I would be thinking on my toes enough that if someone was very egregious and was like troll, acid, fire, use that, I would change it on the spot. Probably be like, no longer acid fire, now it is this and this.
or I think if it was me, I'd be like, oh, you see this weird energy form and it zaps the trolls and they transform into a grotesque beast and you have no idea what it is. You can make rolls to figure it out, but
Yeah.
you're no longer fighting trolls anymore.
Yep. I think some other great ways too to kind of to curb some of the metagaming knowledge is personalizing your campaign content. If you're up to that, because that way any sort of like lore and like unique information from like a setting book may or may not necessarily be relevant to the players. So if someone picks up some book about, Dragonlance or whatever campaign, um that it may not be the same for your world, and that's something that you can do to kind of help that out as well. My mind just blanked and I couldn't think of any other setting for some reason. It just like went totally blank. It was just Dragonlance and that was it. And I haven't even played Dragonlance.
I was gonna say, I don't think you'll ever have to worry about me. I'm too lazy to run to a book and look stuff up.
Yeah, or yeah. Faerun, Eberron, Ravenloft, Spelljammer, Greyhawk. Okay. Thanks, Brain. Thanks for putting me on the spot there. Appreciate that. Another way too is using homebrew rules specifically, to kind of help with metagaming stuff. Is maybe things don't work the same way in your world. I'm trying to find an example that we have in our session zeros. I thought there was a good one for some of our homebrew rules that we have. Well, I guess the death saves are a big one that just kind of a home rule that just specifically helps against that. Another thing are like help actions. This isn't necessarily metagamey, but we kind of have the rule that if someone wants to help somebody with a skill check, they have to be trained in it. So that way all 5 people can't just make a, history check on something all at the same time.
Mhm.
Kind of helps with some of that stuff too. So using your homebrew rules to curb that stuff.
Yeah, I think people should utilize assisting more than having everybody roll. Then like pick that one person. 2 people are trained and make one person roll who's really good at it. To help, like, all right, what did you roll? What did you roll? What did you roll? Instead of like going around in a circle. You've spoken about how a DM can combat metagaming. How can other players do to help metagamer at the table? It's just like, like I guess a couple quips are like, well, my character doesn't know that, and or just having that conversation, right? Um, like for me as a veteran player, when I'm playing with new people, I like seeing them trying to figure it out rather than me just pointing it out. 'Cause that's more fun to me, just to watch them bash their heads around something to
Mhm.
like figure it out.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, VS?
I agree with Moops. I love um approaching every situation in game from the perspective of what does my character possibly know given their background or given their skills. So I always play it regardless of whether I'm familiar with something or how a monster works. I will always play it dumb if my character doesn't know. I prefer it that way. It helps me be more engaged because I'm able to like get into my character more that way. And I think it's more fun at the table if your character doesn't know a thing, they don't know a thing. You got to roll with it. So, but I imagine if like there's somebody who's continuously sort of metagaming in a way that's not comfortable for the rest of the players at the table, I think you probably either the DM or the everyone as a whole out of session might have to have a conversation and remind them of what you're trying to accomplish with the game, and if they're you know looking for something different, then maybe your session is not for them. Maybe communication again. It's all communication.
I think one thing that helps, especially helps a DM, are if not only the DM tries to reinforce the session zero discussions and kind of the rules, because it comes kind of different coming from a DM, because the DM is kind of the de facto position of authority at the table. But
Mhm.
having other players point out to a fellow player that, hey, maybe you're metagaming on this a little bit. I don't know if your character would know that. That also, uh, this came to my mind. That hits different for some reason, right? Coming from another player versus the DM too. Having players help reinforce that sort of group norms helps, because that way it's not just the big bad mean DM getting on to you. It's
Mhm.
like, hey, we all agreed to this, and is this not working for you? Or like, hey, maybe you shouldn't know that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, it's all about delivery and tone as well. Like
mhm.
Max was saying in a very nice way. You're like, "Hey, stop fucking metagaming." Like you shouldn't be unless that's your relationship with your friends, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, communication's key. Like for example, if you're playing a campaign and you're all fledgling adventurers, you probably don't know a lot about anything. As
Mhm,
opposed if you're playing a separate campaign where you're all grizzled, jaded adventurers and you've seen some shit, you probably know a thing or two.
mhm. There's some other things that I do as a DM too to kind of help with metagaming on my end. Big one is rewarding role playing specifically. So like when we give out inspiration for players who sort of play to their characters like personalities or flaws, bonds, or ideals, frequently when a player does that, I will give them inspiration for it. Or just as a way to reward that behavior of like role playing and sort of acting based on your character is the way to go. So rewarding some of that stuff can help to sort of give positive reinforcement on those sort of things. I think some other things are too, like I joked about it before, but sort of like implementing like consequences of if they're in game metagaming like combat stuff, have the monsters change tactics based on what they're discussing for metagaming. I mean, if the players can talk about it and the monsters can know about it, right? So have them change their tactics based on their metagaming behavior. That's sort of the carrot and the stick version of both sides there. Another thing that I do, and people usually talk about metagaming about monsters and combat and stuff, but also there's a little bit of metagaming for outside of that about like the story and the plot and what they think they might know about the certain universe or what have you. Some of the things that I'll do is like giving people like in-game like notes or handouts or stuff like that. So then that way it's communicating that important information. And then instead of just trying to remember, they just have it in front of them. They know that this is the way this thing works. And I was given something, I think for both campaigns I've used like little like letters people have written like in game one, like right at the very beginning when you get a letter for your contract, giving you all like little handout maps and stuff like that. Another thing that I love doing too is sort of like individualized knowledge where I will tailor information based on their character. So I may send DMs or stuff to different players based on what their character would know about a situation, so that not everyone has the same information. So they really can't metagame it because they all have different perspectives on it. I think it's a really cool way to do it too.
Yeah, you did that last session as we were talking about the location we're going to without getting spoilers.
Mm-hmm.
And the party's like, "Oh, where is that?" And you were just typing that out to me, so I was like reading it out loud to the party.
I should have got it to you
in,
earlier. That was my bad.
in
But
character. Oh, it worked out because like you parsed the information like perfectly when as the other characters were asking about the location we're going to.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I like doing that, and I do it a lot. Where I'll just send DMs to people based on like, well, this is what you know about this. Makes things more interesting too, I think.
It does. I agree. Let's see. At least that's unfortunate leads to an adversarial situation between players and DM, and the party starts plotting in secret, and then gets mad or mad when step 2 of their 10-part plan doesn't work because they made a poor assumption and didn't inform the DM about it. Yeah. I mean, I think even though we have our side chat between just the players, like we still let Max know what we're planning to do next, so Max can plan appropriately because we are live streaming. We're performing like a show at the same time. So like we can't really plot in secret and then not tell Max about it because then once we're like Max will be like, I need a 20-minute break, and then he has to plan something during a break. So
Mhm.
it's in our benefit that we all like work together, and especially because we are live streaming. And like if we were playing around a table and we weren't streaming, I think things would play out differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zeus, when you're talking about like having the monsters react to the metagaming, that's what I was mentioning of like the carrot and the stick version, where the carrot is rewarding the role playing and the stick is sort of punishing metagaming. And you really have to know your audience and know your group whether they'll take offense to the monsters changing tactics based on the metagaming. Probably so. They probably would take offense to that, but that's why it's something that you would have discussions about. And I like what you brought up earlier, VS, about having discussions like out of the game, like out of character, about certain things to do with the game, because there are just some problems that shouldn't be solved in game.
Yeah. I just feel like game time is fun time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're at the table and you're rolling, it really will bring down the mood if you start having like arguments about who knows what and where you got
Hmm.
that information from, and like it just not everything. Yeah, just do it outside the game if it's necessary,
Hmm.
right? Because we play every Friday for the most part, but you know, people that are in IRL campaigns, they might meet once a month or once every 2 months.
Hmm.
And you don't want the one time you're playing bi-monthly to devolve into like or get soured by things like that. So,
Hmm. Yeah,
you know,
totally agree. Totally agree.
don't kill the mood, bro.
Yeah, don't be a metagaming dick.
And I think it's different. Like most groups kind of have their group that their go-to group that they always play with, and usually with friends. It's not really with randos. I know there's some places you could just go and then there are DMs hanging out and wanting people to play. So usually I think those situations probably happen more with people who just like go for a pickup game rather than like their core group where they play all the time and everyone knows each other. So it really depends on the situation. Or if you're like introducing a new player to the group and you're like, oh, this person really wants to play D&D, and then you find out they're like they may not be the best fit for the group, or yeah, like, hey, this is how we play in this group, and be respectful of that if you want to stay
Mhm.
in this group.
So, Village, when you say how do you feel about players playing smarter than their characters, what do you mean exactly? Um, in that regard, like I already talked about puzzles. I don't want to think like my character if I'm solving a puzzle, because if it's like a logic mind bender type thing, depends on the DM's intention, but it's more than likely meant for the players to do it. Puzzles depends on the DM intention. I mean, you can always ask about it. If it's a puzzle that's reliant on like in-game information and like lore and history and stuff like that, then yeah, you probably don't want to necessarily just use information your character wouldn't know. But if it's like a puzzle, if I give you like a logic puzzle to figure out, I don't expect them to think about how smart their actual character is and then whether or not they can have the solution. So for me as a DM, if I'm giving you like a logic puzzle, it's for the players really to kind of solve it. Because I think that's just solving puzzles in D&D is an abstraction layer that's hard enough that I don't want to implement another layer of like, oh, but your character might not have thought about that. Um, I don't know. I also have like a pet peeve of people that play their characters. Not saying that's what you're talking about, but that if their character has like a 10 or an 8 intelligence, they act like they're like an idiot or like can barely speak anyway. Like which isn't the case because 10 is average intelligence for a person. But I don't think it's a big of a deal there. Like, just it depends. Talk to the group, the DM. But if I give y'all a puzzle, use your whole brain for it.
I don't think um people not playing to their attributes is necessarily a bad thing. Like you can be a intimidating barbarian with a charisma 8, but doesn't the charisma 8 doesn't necessarily mean that they're not good at social skills. It just means maybe they're like horrifically scarred and their appearance is grotesque, and that's why they have a low charisma. But they could still be charismatic.
Yeah,
Um, or the barbarian who's strategizing a war general with the intelligence of 6. Just because they have low intelligence doesn't mean they're not speaking from like experience or learning from their elders.
yeah. Maybe the barbarian was a gladiator and has fought numerous opponents and has seen all kinds of fighting techniques and been in situations where they've had to come up with strategy to win, and maybe that reminds them of that from their past. And there's
Yeah,
any number of ways you can role play it. And then for a lot of other stuff, we're playing a dice game here, so roll some dice, see see what happens. If your character can pull a stroke of brilliance out of thin air sometimes, but based on a dice roll, that's perfectly fine. I think,
Yeah, and I think of like with your specific example of your intelligence 6 barbarian like strategizing like a war general. I mean, I guess it's really up to the DM to decide on that specifically of, you know, does this plan that this person's formulating, is it too far outside of what their character would know, right? And I guess it's all about how you present the information too. And it's also all about how you're discussing the information. If it's all in character, then it's on that player to describe why their barbarian might know about these specific tactics for this specific scenario, right? And as long as they're not using like metagaming knowledge specific to the enemies that they're facing, like I'm all fine with the party coming up with a plan, right? I mean, there's not really anything too metagamey about that as long as it's sort of in character for our game specifically and doesn't turn into just a spiral of arguments about what they're going to do. I don't see any necessarily like any harm in that of the barbarian, even though they have low intelligence, say, hey, we should go around the back because they're weaker there. Yeah, sure. Then maybe they say, I'll go around the back and you two hit from the side. Well, maybe they are describing like a flanking maneuver that some general might come up with, but it could also be an experience in anything else. That specific example, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's how you role play it as well. Um, like someone would be eloquent about their plan, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go through the aqueduct and sneak into the center of the courthouse and infiltrate the base." And then the barbarian could be like, "Oh, why don't we just sneak?" And then maybe someone else can pick up on what the barbarian's putting down.
Yeah, and like even in like a combat scenario too, where we're talking about strategizing. Like, say the player comes up with the idea of like, I don't know, pincering the enemy or something, and it's the barbarian player who maybe has a low intelligence score. They can just be like, "I'm gonna go from this side, you go from that side together," and it's like not exactly like yeah, it's technically a strategy that like a commander might come up with, but it's literally just the barbarian saying, hey, I'm gonna hit the left side of them, you smack them on the right side of their head at the same time and we'll squash them, sort of thing, you know what I mean?
To answer your specific your sort of the meat of the question is, do you consider acting outside of your attributes as metagaming, or can you explain it or roll it? And I would say that it's up to the DM to decide what is acting outside of your attributes, because I feel like a lot of what we're talking about is sort of this ethereal like player discussions that aren't really like part of like rolling or doing something specific. They're just like conversational, right? Now if like a 6 charisma, fighter wants to try and like, smooth talk this noble to do whatever, I would be like, hold on, before you make your speech, let's see you roll first, and then you can tailor your speech based on how you roll, right? When it comes to like battle plans and stuff, and I use that word loosely. Now, if it was like a 6 intelligence barbarian leading an army of like 200 soldiers, I might be like, oh, you're gonna have to roll on that to see if your soldiers are gonna like do this and how effectively they're gonna do this. But if it's like party communication on like how to defeat a monster in character, I, as long as it's not using metagaming specific information, I wouldn't really do anything about that specifically. But it's up to your DM and the group, I guess, as a whole to discuss what is acting outside of your attributes. Like, what does that mean specifically? And especially in regards to like the non-physical attributes, like what Zeus was saying, like the wisdom, intelligence, and charisma. Because it's very easy to sort of materialize what strength, dex, and con means, whereas the other three are a little more less tangible.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you're all there to play a game and have fun. And if it's not really disrupting the gameplay and not upsetting everybody, then I don't think it's a big issue.
And if it is, have a chat about it. And be like, hey, I'm not sure if your 6 intelligence cleric could really solve this Rubik's Cubes puzzle in 2 seconds. Maybe we should talk about that. Or I don't know. I'm just like making shit up on the spot at this point. But yeah, I think that the acting outside your attributes is a very sort of murky term in the beginning. So you get a murky answer. I guess I don't know. I'm just kidding.
I think it really comes down to of how well developed your character is. Like when I say about like their personality, their backstory, and all those kinds of things and their quirks. If you really nail down your characters, all those things, it should really help you navigate how to roleplay that character the way
Mhm.
you want to.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yep. I would think that if there's something that should be basically relegated to a role, then that's how you solve it. If a role doesn't necessarily fit the situation that you're in, then it becomes a little more nebulous, I would say.
Yep.
That answer didn't sound satisfying.
know.
It's a very long-winded answer to a question that's hard to answer. Sorry if we failed you.
It's tough. So all these like nuances and edge case types of situations.
And Max said it early on. It a lot of the answers to these questions is it's communication.
Yeah.
The communication with the DM, communication with your fellow players. Like a lot of these issues, that if they are become issues, can be, hopefully mitigated that way. Have a nice session 0 at the start of the campaign, and then as you go, ask your DM questions.
Yeah. Session 0 is important. We've already talked about that, but I'm really glad they're going to include that in the 1 D&D
Mhm.
Dungeon Master's Guide.
And you could
Specifically.
take it to the next level and do like quarterly retrospective. Like mid campaign reviews. You're like, hey, how are things going? What are you guys feeling? What do anything we need to discuss? Anything we need to change? You could do that too.
We do that after every session.
Yes, we do.
We talk about what went well, what didn't go well, kind of give people props that deserve props. We'll bring up issues if there's issues. It's all in the spirit of making the game better for everybody.
I'm determined this time to not forget plot threads. Because on our last campaign, we left several threads like open. And this time, if somebody wants to meet us at a fancy dance ball, dang it, we should meet them.
That's really funny. Yeah, y'all really have some what the word I'm looking for is here, but
Oblivious?
yes. Well, I was gonna say some flashbacks to campaign 1 where you left a plot thread dangling for 2/3 of the campaign.
Yeah.
Which is okay. It doesn't bother me. We already talked about that, but
Yeah, a mansion that we had but also didn't have at the same time.
We could have pursued it any time, but we for whatever reason we didn't find time to do that.
yeah.
I'm gonna try to be on top of that this time. Let's go on
Yeah.
all the adventures.
Yeah. Keeping notes is important. Keeping notes is important. Y'all have anything else you can think of about metagaming we didn't discuss, or any questions anybody else in the audience might have about it specifically, or anything about maybe games that you've played you want advice on for metagaming or whatever? Type it in
I
the
don't want
chat.
to I don't want to feel like we're poo-pooing on metagaming. Like it's really up to your group. If it's metagaming is okay. It just really depends on your group. It's not a bad thing. It's a group thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a DM, what kinds of metagaming do you wish players commit? None ever. No, I'm kidding. Nothing. No, I think sort of the behavior that we have for you all, is having your side chat to sort of discuss the things that are happening in game that we don't have time to cover during the game. Like I like that sort of stuff because it helps me. Because more often than not, you know, they may come up with a plan of what to do next. They may be like, "Hey, Max, we're thinking about like exploring some of these things later." This helps me to prep at a time. It's a lot easier when I know what they're interested in and what they want to do, so I can sort of focus my prep a little more versus, you know, we just got a boat and we can go anywhere. Well, let's see what happens next time. Like that's kind of, I mean, you know, I'd have to do it if they wanted, but that'd be really hard on a dungeon master of like, hey, we've got a bunch of islands and a bunch of places to go. Next session we're gonna roll a dice and figure out what's gonna happen. It's like, okay.
We wouldn't do that to you, Max.
Yeah. Could you imagine we're like one session we tell Max we're gonna go to the pirate island, and then all of a sudden we're like, actually no, we're gonna go to the black hole in the ocean today. Just out of nowhere.
Yeah, fun times.
and then we're starting campaign 3.
Just what metagaming practice is actually your jam?
That's a tough one.
I don't know if it's metagaming, but because I'm technically not utilizing it in a campaign, but I sometimes have fun trying to come up with like min-max characters, like exploring potential like builds and spells and stuff that might not make sense from any kind of roleplay perspective, but just on pure power. But you know, I've never would use that in a campaign. But that's min-maxing can be fun, like when you're just brainstorming stuff. I like doing that. I don't know if that's metagaming though.
I like to anti metagame. So what you kind of said is me as a DM versus me as a player. If we face, we'll use the same when we're doing. If we face a troll, because I know what trolls can do, I will go out of my way to not use fire or acid until it comes up in the combat from somebody else. Whether they have like a knowledge check or they stumble upon it, I will actively do the wrong thing until something gets figured out. That's what I like to do.
Oh yeah, Bun, 100%. If you are planning to have feelings for another character, and I mean your character for another character, definitely make sure that other person is okay with you trying to flirt with their character or what have you. Otherwise, it's gonna be very, very awkward.
Yep. Talk to them outside the game to see if that's okay.
Just like VS, but the opposite. Trying to make the worst character you can possibly make.
Yeah. That's only one bun. Also, your jam. Metagaming, the metagaming. Someone tells you what to do on your turn. That is the ideal thing to do. That you didn't ask them. Do the absolute opposite thing than what they told you to do. That's kind of the adversarial way to handle metagaming, but
Yeah. You know, if it's your character telling the other character, then maybe it's okay. Maybe not. It's up to you as a player and the character.
I think what she's describing is more along the lines of Max
gamers.
is the player telling Moobs the player, be like, hey, you really need to use like smite here, but don't do it until you crit, and then make sure that you use your bonus action to do this, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff.
Goes to sleep. Goodbye.
Yeah, Bun. Someone's trying to mansplain D&D to Bun of all people.
Ooh-wee.
Should be like,
yeah, don't
right.
mansplain.
Yeah,
just don't do
it. Yep, for sure. Amazing.
Yeah, don't try to be the quarterback. Don't be the backseat gamer. Let people play the way they want to play.
That's why we have our kind of discussion in our rule of like, if if someone like needs help on their turn, then they can designate who they want to help them, whether it's the DM or another player. Be like, I need help. Can you help me? Otherwise, don't say shit. It's not your turn, not your character.
Yeah, our party's good about that. Like,
Yeah, the best.
if we learn about things in combat, then
Mhm.
our characters will often just shout like a one-liner thing, like, "Hey, I hit it, and this thing happened. Maybe
Mhm.
try that."
I like
And
the little one line like quips that you all do in combat because you all have a sense of urgency on it. You don't like go off on a long speech about something. I like how you share information in combat and character like
yeah,
that.
I just think stuff
Well,
like that's
I
fun.
I really like that you let us do that because normally sometimes people can only speak on their turn, and you let us to have one-liners, mid combat.
And it makes
Makes
sense
it feel more real,
because,
you know?
yeah, because technically the whole round is happening all like at the same time ish. Like one like one word quick answers back and forth. Like that's fine. You couldn't have a conversation though, but just I mean the way that you all use it adds more to the game, makes it more enjoyable. So
Yeah, it's like you said, we're not like having monologues as we're
mm-hmm,
attacking stuff. It's
mm-hmm.
if you imagine a scenario where combat's happening and everything's happening fast and people are literally shouting at each other, like, "Watch out that way! I'm gonna attack this guy." That stuff happens when people are fighting.
Yeah, and
So
the way that we play it too is for stuff that would have like a specific like mechanical benefit where like for example, if you're asking the bad guy, like will you yield? Will you like lay down your arms? Like I'm gonna be like, you'll find out in their turn. They're not gonna tell you now. Like that kind of stuff. I'll make it wait to the next turn. But like quick little things, nah, not usually.
But yeah, I think that's metagaming in a nutshell based on our
Yeah.
knowledge and information.
Yeah. Don't be a jerk. Communicate. That's how you solve your problems. Um, but yeah, thanks everybody for watching and hanging out with us. Bun is going to be streaming tomorrow on Art at 7 p.m. Pacific right here. So come back tomorrow and we'll see you then. Bye, everybody.
Peace.
bye, thank you.